Hi, my name is Toni. If you looked at my last few videos, you'll see I've got my hands on a very old book. It's 60 plus years old. One of the very first books about the Beatles, if not the very first book, written by Michael Braun. He followed the Beatles around from 1963 to 1964, and he wrote a book about it. In this introduction that I'm in right now, I'm reading parts of the book to you. In the introduction, he quotes the Beatles, and you can tell that he literally wrote down what they said verbatim, because that's where you get that Beatle-y flavor from. You have to write it down like they do. So here we go, continuing on in the introduction. I'm skipping a few parts. He said what was fascinating about the Beatles was the things they said. And now he quotes Ringo Starr. None of us has quite grasped what it is all about yet. He's talking about their newfound fame. But we're young. It's washing over our heads like a huge tidal wave. But we're young. Youth is on our side. And it's youth that matters right now. I don't care about politics, just people. That was Ringo Starr at age 23. And it says his ambition was to be happy. Now we have George Harrison. A quote from him. I wouldn't do all of this if I didn't like it. I wouldn't do anything I didn't want to do, would I? George Harrison, age 21, lead guitarist, ambition to design a guitar. Now I'm going to have to look that up sometime because I don't know if George ever did design a guitar. I've seen Bo Diddley's guitar. Bo Diddley used to take his guitar into a guitar shop, the same guitar shop that I used to take my guitar into in Florida. I don't know if George ever did that. If anybody knows if George ever designed a guitar, would you put it in the comments, please? Now we have Paul speaking, and he says, security is the only thing I want. Money to do nothing with. Money to have in case you wanted to do something. That was Paul McCartney at age 22. Most of us know he was the bass guitarist. And Paul's ambition at age 22 was to be successful. Well, I live in England, and Paul McCartney is one of the wealthiest men in England. He's very successful. He's worth about £1 billion. Now we have something that John Lennon said. People say we're loaded with money, but by comparison with those who are supposed to talk the Queen's English, that's ridiculous. We're only earning. They've got capital behind them, and they're earning on top of that. The more people you meet, the more you realize it's all a class thing. That was John Lennon when he was aged 23, rhythm guitarist. His ambition at age 23? To write a musical. Now that I know the answer to. He never wrote a musical. But he didn't live very long, did he? He died at 40. What a shame. Now we have Ringo again. Somebody asks, why do you wear all those rings on your fingers? And Ringo says, because I can't get them through me nose. Because I can't get them through my nose. Okay, very cool, Ringo. That is a good answer to a very stupid question. Ringo. I saw him once. He waved to me. I waved to him. I was really only inches away from him, to be honest. And he was really sweet. That was in the late 70s in 1978. That was. So he's still very young, and he would have been about 38 years old, and he was a very happy person at that time. You could tell in his soul. Anyways. All right, now we have Paul again. Coming up here, let's see. Paul goes on to say, it's disturbing that people should go around blowing us up. But if an atom bomb should explode, I'd say, oh well. No point in saying anything else, is there? People are so crackers. I know the bomb is ethically wrong, but I won't go around crying. I suppose I could do something like wearing those ban the bomb things. But it's something like religion that I don't think about. It doesn't fit in with my life. Paul. Well, in those days, in 63 and 64, the atom bomb was a big topic because of the Cold War that was going on at that time. So it was on everybody's mind. I was very little, and I even remember it. But I'm sure that Paul would have had a different viewpoint about the atom bomb exploding if he would have had his family at that time, his wife and children. I don't think he'd say, oh, well, if an atom bomb exploded. It sounds very youthful to me. Young. All right, now we have John again. I don't suppose I think much about the future. I don't really give a damn. Though now we've made it, it would be a pity to get bombed. It's selfish, but I don't care too much about humanity. I'm an escapist. Everybody's always drumming on about the future, but I'm not letting it interfere with my laughs, if you see what I mean. Perhaps I worried more when I was working it out about God. And that was John. John was my favorite, really. I love them all. And I've read so many books about them that I've come to know them really well. And I don't think that John was the greatest guy in the world. But I wouldn't want to be married to him. But George called him an angel. And also said that he could really have his, not so nice sides. And John liked this book. He said it was a true book. Now we have Paul again, who says, don't, for heaven's sake, say we're the new youth because that's a load of old rubbish. Paul. Well, I don't know what the philosophy is behind that, but I do think personally that the Beatles really were a turning point in pop culture and in the world in general. Things really changed after they came around. They sort of led that movement, or at least represented it. Now we have George. George says, naturally, I'm part of my generation. I like the way people bring things out in the open. I'd hate it if when you spoke about sex, everybody curled away. George. So I suppose he was talking about how things were changing, and he seemed to think things were changing for the better, because they had come out of the 50s and now they were in the 60s. Things in the 60s were a lot different than they were in the 50s. I was not around in the 50s, but that is a fact. Now, here comes John. Short and sweet. Do you wear wigs? And John goes on to say, if we do, they must be the only ones with real dandruff. John. Oh, boy. John. What caught my attention to this book was that John Lennon, this was his favorite book of all the Beatles books. Back to Paul. He says, at school we had a great, hip English master. And instead of keeping us to the drag stuff like Return of the Native, he would let us read Tennessee Williams and Lady Chatterley's Lover and The Miller's Tale. Paul. Okay. Well, I'll be honest. I have never read The Return of the Native or, let's see, yeah. No, never. I don't even know what The Return of the Native is. If anybody listening wants to tell me briefly what that is, you can write it in the comments, because I probably won't have time to look that up. But we all know Tennessee Williams wrote some classics. Paul did very well in English. He may have had some ambition to become an English teacher. I'm not 100% positive, but that sounds about right to me. He did well in English. Now we have John again, who says, I get spasms of being intellectual. I read a bit about politics, but I don't think I'd vote for anyone. No message from any of those phony politicians is coming through to me. John. Well, that is very apropos for our modern day in 2024, with all that's going on in the world today. How much more so today than it was 60 years ago. George goes on to say, we've always had laughs. Sometimes we find ourselves hysterical especially when we're tired. We laugh at soft remarks that the majority of the people don't get. George. Well, I couldn't help but think, can you imagine these four guys who Mick Jagger called the four-headed monster because they were always together in those days. And if you read the various books, they were always together. They socialized together, they worked together, they visited each other's houses. They trusted each other. Can you imagine them late at night getting the giggles and just laughing their heads off and having how many inside jokes? How many inside jokes must these guys have had? How many? I love a good inside joke. All right, now, here comes something that is kind of sad that John Lennon said. The thing I'm afraid of is growing old. I hate that. You get old and you've missed it somehow. The old always resent the young and vice versa. John. Well, as we all know, John never did get old. That was one of the worst times in my life. But now we have Happy Ringo. And he goes on to say, I'd like to end up sort of unforgettable. Ringo. Well, in my opinion, I think that the Beatles did a darn good job of making themselves unforgettable. And since Ringo was the drummer, the percussionist, I'd say he'll be in. Well, there's been some 250 books written about the Beatles. And there'll probably be more. So he is definitely going to end up sort of unforgettable. These are some pages from the book I took pictures of. And contrary to what Paul said about them representing today's youth and calling it rubbish, John goes on to say, ours is a today image. And I thought about that. You know, show business is an image. And especially in the days of the early Beatles, Brian Epstein, he preferred to be called Epstein, was really trying to control their image. He took them from these leather outfits, and they would eat on stage and smoke on stage, and he put them in those suits and really created a new image. But they were just people like everybody else. Liverpool is one of my favorite cities, so I thought I'd show you a picture here. There are 3 buildings on the, they're facing the river, and they're called the 3 Graces. This one here is the Liver Building. And if you want to look more up about the Liver Building, just Wikipedia that. Liver, L-I-V-E-R. So those were some quotes that we had today by the Beatles. And I'll try and get back on here tomorrow, but if not tomorrow, I'll try and get back on here the day after that. And we've got some different information in this book coming up. It takes us up to Cambridge. Thank you for being with me. Have a great day. And toodle pip. Bye.